I got my focus on passion and empathy, gaining perspectives, investing, I do believe money and grinding go hand in hand, you will see. I'm working smart, expending my energy, hope that you feeling me. I'm acting differently, you got a friend in me. I'm working hard to try and work smart, no time to complain, it's time to start, we gotta work. Future millionaires.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Future Millionaires. Today we have an Elliot Padfield, who is a 17-year-old that has led multiple successful business ventures and been very involved in those processes. And on top of that, he's starting to shake up in the public speaking arena and really get into that venture as well. So without further ado, Elliot, how you doing today?
I'm great, thank you, Gavin. And, thank you so much for having me on the show. And certainly hearing back, some of the things that I've done in one simple way like that, it is amazing to hear.
Definitely. I'm excited to dive into them all because I feel like there's a lot of layers, similar to onion, of what you've been able to do in a short amount of time. And I feel it's going to be super beneficial for a lot of younger people to see how much is achievable, even if you're young, if you really set a goal and stay focused with that goal. Because I feel like, tell me, how important is and has focus been so far for you?
Yeah, 100%. I think the focus and the perseverance of whatever you're doing, even if it's not entrepreneurship, but certainly within entrepreneurship, is so vital. I think it's so easy to essentially, have shiny object syndrome, be chasing the next trend, when at the end of the day, you can make good money in any field and you're far better off finding something to lock down on. So I would say wherever you are at in the process, whether it's, learning a skill, starting a brand or scaling a startup, it doesn't matter, but focus is one of the core elements.
Love it. And we're definitely going to dive further into, how you're able to apply that. But I'd love for you to start just by giving, the listeners a 60 to 90 second snippet of where you're really at right now in your life and business and what you're focusing on today.
Sure thing. So, as obviously you've already said, I'm 17 years old. I've run a number of successful brands so far. So I started quite a while ago with a digital marketing agency many years ago. Since then, I've sold 3 of my main companies. And right now, I've changed things up actually. The start of the year, 2020 has been a big year for me. It's changed a lot of things for everybody, I think. But for me, it was planning my move overseas, selling most of my companies and starting up my new brand. And essentially what I'm doing now is buying up small businesses, growing them onto a national level and building those as part of a portfolio. But I think one of the most exciting things that I've got the opportunities to do right now is primarily a lot of my public speaking work. I do loads of high schools and I do quite a lot of corporate bookings, being able to actually share my own experiences. But then also I do so much coaching and training now with other entrepreneurs. And actually I feel that I've got to a stage where almost I can make a bigger impact by helping others, educating others, teaching others than doing it myself. But right now, we've got a big team, over 150 people, and we're growing at a good rate, certainly so.
Definitely. Just the typical 17-year-old summer.
But it's been interesting.
It sounds like it, and I feel like there's going to be tons of value provided, on how, like I said, a person of your age is able to really, pull these things off at such a, consistent level. And before we dive into that, I really want to, we'll dive into this actually as we go on, but lay out the journey of when you first started in business and kind of like your first venture. And let's start there and kind of work our way in chronological order. Because the first thing I think of when I hear, there's a 17-year-old who's doing all this is I'm like, well, where the hell did this guy start? Did he start when he was 9? Like, how did this, go for you?
Sure thing. So, I think really at the end of the day, I feel as a person, somebody that has always almost had an affinity for entrepreneurship. And I don't think that that's necessarily the best way to approach it, but my mindset has always been in a way that's allowed me to operate like that. So even before I got started in business, I think I've always been a very naturally competitive person. And equally, I think that I've had almost a fear of being average is how I describe it quite a lot in my public speaking. Or certainly I've always been driven to go above and beyond what everybody else is doing. I've always had this idea that actually going with what everyone else is doing at the same pace as everybody else blends you into a crowd. I've always wanted to, have that unique identifying factor. So for me, I think as growing up, I realized that entrepreneurship and business was one of the only fields where I could really exploit that to its full extent. And actually a student I was coaching the other day, they were considering a career in law and they're like, well, it's one of the highest flying career paths. But even once you reach the top of that, there's still a glass ceiling. We're in entrepreneurship, there is no limit. So, I mean, for me, I think that was always my interest. I've always had a huge passion for learning. I think because that was one of my ways of facilitating that urge, learning more information, essentially knowing more than everybody else and being a source of knowledge and information for people around me. And that's something that I think really kicked it all off. And then I started to realize that actually I was providing enough value to other people that people would pay me for it. I think there was
what age was that at too when you realized that?
That must have been crazy young. I was between 12 or 13.
So you started then at like 10 or something?
Basically, to an extent. I mean, the thing is, it's very difficult because I never had a day where I went out and, launched a business.
Yeah, where you're like,
much in the same way that most people do. I think that's actually one of the things I love about teen entrepreneurship is because it's not, you're in a 9-to-5 job and you've got to leave your job to, start a company and risk it all. It's very easy, actually. You have a lot of spare time, as a teenager, and actually you can use that to start something without any risk whatsoever. So putting a start date on stuff is pretty difficult. But, I started to realize that providing value to other people was something that could be monetized. And I think it was that sort of raw, stripped down form of entrepreneurship. I wasn't thinking long term about huge amounts of monetization or an entrepreneurial lifestyle. At the end of the day, I was providing value. And then the second step of that is trying to monetize, which is exactly what I did. And I launched my first sort of creative and digital agency, Padfield Digital, back in, I'll be completely honest, because it's taken so many forms, that grew so naturally. I mean, I don't even know really when it started, but that's how it started for me, I guess.
Okay. So, I mean, as a general ballpark though, I mean, were you in high school when that started or like middle school?
It would have been
when you officially definitely. Middle school. Okay. Yeah. So, clearly we'll move on to some of the other stuff that you've been doing, but I want to take a second and kind of dive into some of that too. When you're in middle school and you're approaching clients, I mean, were you the one doing the sales? How were you navigating that process being so young?
Sure thing. I mean, it would have been difficult, I think, for me to, now if I was starting a brand, I'd have no issue with going out, phoning up clients directly and closing deals. I think back then, though, it is different. And, I'm not going to sit here and try and pretend that it doesn't matter what age you are, just go out and sell, because things don't quite work like that. I mean, for me, actually, I started on the freelance marketplaces, Upwork, People Per Hour, whatever existed back then. And I think that is one of those environments where you're not really competing on experience or who you are. There isn't much of a sales process. It's, can you offer the job at the cheapest price, which wasn't the best thing long term. And I think for people wanting to start a business or become a freelancer, competing on price alone doesn't seem that attractive. But it was just one of those ways of pushing into a market. And it ended up that actually I had a number of clients that I was doing recurring work for. They liked, they liked my quality of the work. And then they started to understand who I was as a person. And I grew through referrals. And actually, to begin with, that was the far, far easiest way. And then once you've got scale and once you've got experience, it all starts to become a little bit easier. So I think, that's a good start. A lot of people now, actually, that I've heard of, almost do free work at the start to get those referrals, to get that. And I think actually there is a large amount of value in that. And there are so many entrepreneurs that I feel, shy away from that and are afraid of that because they feel that they're undervaluing their service or, they're affecting their brand reputation. Well, at the end of the day, if you don't sell anything, you don't have a brand and it doesn't have a reputation. So, get started, build up a portfolio, and then the rest, to be honest, is easy. It's a natural journey. Don't try and plan every step of your journey from the very beginning. Just make the first step and then figure it out as you go along.
Yeah, I feel like that's huge because I feel like a lot of young people too. I mean, even when I talk with them, a lot of times it's, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I'm like, well, start. And they're like, well, where do I start? I'm like, literally pick anything. Like I can suggest certain things that I think will take, give you a better chance of success and have lower overheads, But also the thing on free work, it's been huge for me. I mean, that's really how I got my first client. Next to free, I was paying like $300 a month for Facebook ads. And that was literally just to cover my costs so I could do that. I didn't have to, go and bag groceries or something. And I was fortunate I was in the position to do so. But
100%. No, I totally agree with that. I mean, it is just that basis of, it's not a matter of undervaluing your services. It's just actually they are providing you something in return, which is incredibly valuable. A big referral or a big testimonial is actually worth the money you'd lose by essentially offering that work for free.
Definitely. No, that's huge. And for any people listening to that, I mean, even just the experience alone, if you don't know what you're doing, like you can learn with someone else's money. Of course, try to get them results. Don't go in just, trying to screw them. But of course, that's not good business principles. But so what work were you doing at that time too for freelance? Like what were you offering to these clients?
Sure thing. So for me, it all started out really with web design. That was something that, as a person, I think I have a natural affinity sort of for computers and development. I mean, it's not something actually that as I've gone more into my entrepreneurial
And was that like
journey,
coding or was that like WordPress and helping people build out sites that way?
It was actually a mixture of both.
Okay.
I mean, to begin with, it was primarily CMS-based stuff, WordPress-based stuff, and that was quite good because the target audience was easier. I mean, actually, I ended up sort of going further and further into that journey, and I ended up building sort of core native apps for clients, and, actually got deeper and deeper into that.
Yeah.
And that sort of led me on to qualifying as a cybersecurity professional, and that's how actually my main company, Padfield International, really got started. And I think once again, my pivot has been huge throughout my career so far. I started off doing web design on a freelance marketplace, and I now run, a private investment firm. It doesn't matter. It's great to think big and have a goal at the end of the day, but you've got to be versatile and you've got to be flexible, because at the end of the day, that is what entrepreneurship's all about.
Definitely. I mean, you've had success clearly in your pivots, and you're just pivoting based on success and what's going to help you be more successful. And I feel like a lot of times too, let me ask you this question, right? Like, what would you say to somebody who wants to pivot, not because they were successful and want something to do more, but because they're putting in work and they're just not seeing the results and they think they may be in the wrong vehicle? Because I know we touched a little bit on earlier going and focusing, but I also feel like there's a balance potentially between either doing that or pivoting depending on your skill sets.
Sure thing. I mean, look, it's difficult, and it does obviously depend a lot on people's individual circumstances. I mean, I think that one huge thing that sort of plagues most people that want to become entrepreneurs is the idea of just, switching between fields. That they've watched something and they've decided to set up a drop shipping store, and then one day they see a YouTube video telling them that they can make $1 million coaching, and then that's what they do. I think if that's the kind of pivot that you're trying to make, then you're doing something wrong. I would say, above all else, I can answer that question directly, but I don't think it's going to be most useful. The one thing, the ideology that I would have at the top of your mind, whatever you're doing in entrepreneurship, is provide value first, monetize second. I think if you go in with a product-centric approach rather than a market-centric approach, you are going to fail in the long run. You might make money and you might make some good money, but at the end of the day, it's not sustainable. Understand how you can provide value to people. If you are offering the exact same service as everybody else, okay, you can take a slice of that pie, you can bring in $20,000 a month, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, if you can craft out your own market or provide value that is unique, then you're going to be in a far, far better position. So, that's what I would say. In the industry or in the business model that you're currently operating under, are you actually providing value? And that's often why I sort of warn people away from things like drop shipping stores, because you're not providing value. You don't have control over your own entrepreneurial ecosystem. And while it can be good to get some experience, it's not there long term. So find out how you can provide value. And if there's no way you feel that you can provide value, then learn in a single field until you can, and then go out and monetize that.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's great. And having that like longer term view. I mean, even you look at some of the drop shippers today, and they're kind of getting the hammer cracked down on them now that some of the stuff's leaking out about what like the sketchy tactics they've used to actually sell products and whatnot. But, so you clearly did that for, how many years do you think you did that for before you transitioned to Padfield International?
Sure thing. So probably about 2.5 years in sort of its full form. And obviously there were the days where I was freelancing, but probably from the day that I took on my first permanent member of staff in one of my offices to the day that I exited that and moved into Padfield International, probably about 2.5 years.
Awesome. So let's start there then. So were you in high school then when you started Padfield International?
Sure thing. So Padfield International would have probably been my freshman year of high school. And that was a big sort of pivot because I was in a position where I was sort of qualifying then as a cybersecurity professional. We were doing a lot of that kind of work at Padfield Digital. And then once again, it was that exact same thought that I've had at every moment of my career. How can I progress beyond that? And that's why I went from web design to cybersecurity. And that's why I was like, okay, what can I do now? And I did a competitive analysis of the assets that I already had. I'd got offices around the world. Okay, so how can I best take advantage of those assets? Well, one thing actually that a lot of clients, certainly of Padfield International, were looking for, and what was our flagship service, was actually being able to have a 24/7 response with local experts wherever you are in the world. And actually that was an asset that I had already got. And even though actually when I sold Padfield Digital, a lot of that obviously went with the sale, I still had those connections. It was very, very easy for me to scale on on an international level from day one. And I think once again, it's all about barrier to entry. Those fields, those industries with a higher barrier to entry are going to be the ones that are going to make you more money. So for me, the transition to Padfield International was, okay, what do I have that nobody else has? Well, I've got contacts with some of the best intelligence and security providers in the world. I've got access to international offices, and that was the big thing. And we started that, and it was a big risk for us. I'd just closed, well, not closed, but sold Padfield Digital. I'd got my payout, and that was sort of going to be my next project. And I think, had I have gone in from day one and said, that's what I want to do, and opened that business, it never would have worked. But once again, there's more value to business and entrepreneurship than the money you make. It's about the extra intangible value you can gain later on for your career.
That's actually a huge nugget right there. And especially you're recognizing that at such a young age and having that long-term approach. And I mean, even before we dive into, some of the stuff that you did to, grow Padfield International to the point of which it was at, I think it's really important for everyone to realize that he's spent 2.5 years in a vehicle before he moved on to the next. I feel like that was probably because I feel like a lot of young people want stuff really quickly.
Oh yeah. And 100%. I mean, look, I fall victim to that sometimes. And, there are people that have worked 9-to-5 jobs and only go and launch their, their own business, go freelance at 45, 40 years old, whatever. And actually, there's still plenty of time to do what you want to do in that time frame. At the end of the day, if you're listening to podcasts like this right now, and you're a teenager or a young professional, you are already way ahead of the curve, because essentially what you're saying is that you want to escape free of what MJ DeMarco calls the slow lane, which is, just putting money into your 401k, saving for retirement, investing your life savings onto Wall Street, hoping to, one day get some sort of return out of that. So you're already, by listening to these podcasts or reading or whatever you're doing, you're already being proactive. You're already showing that that's something you want. You've just got to then try and convert that into something that you can action today and push forward on a daily basis.
Hell yeah. No, that's great advice. And, Padfield International too, for the listeners out there, can you explain what you guys were doing day to day? Because I know you said cybersecurity and whatnot was a part of that, if I'm correct. And I'm just curious to hear more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, sure thing. So, I mean, we started off sort of with that company in cybersecurity. We did quite a lot of managed security, solutions. With Padfield Digital, we used to provide more consultancy. The big pivot with Padfield International is that we started to offer complete managed solutions. So that was everything from proactive risk assessments all the way, down to incident response. And that was sort of how Padfield International started. I mean, at its peak, well, really this year, to be honest, we do a lot of different things. We now specialize primarily in maritime security. So we do a lot of intelligence, we do cyber security for vessels, we do private ships, commercial ships, we do military, we do stationary platforms, stationary offshore platforms. We do everything. But at the end of the day, it was that natural, slow pivot. So, I mean, let's just say, you've got a vessel or a shipment that is going through certain waters or whatever. We can do risk assessments and then advise on that. And I mean, to be honest, obviously, my exit from Padfield International is currently undergoing. But certainly, if I hadn't have exited, my big next step would have been to push into physical security and get people down on the ground, get our own security teams that our clients could employ. Once again, a year ago, Padfield International was doing very well, but were we in a position to offer that? No. But over time, as we perfected and added value where we could, we can then find different routes to explore. And I mean, it is how it is. At the end of the day, we got acquired by a large physical security provider. So it made sense for them just as much as it made sense for us. So it's just that slow progressive journey. And that's what I'd say all the way. Entrepreneurship is a journey. And I don't think that entrepreneurship is for everybody. If you are so driven on the end goal, but absolutely hate the process, I've got some words of advice, because at the end of the day, most people would consider me to be relatively successful. And I can assure you the end result is not as good as it seems. You've got to love the process, because you're going to get to whatever you call your end result, and you're going to want more. You're going to want more success. You're going to want to be able to speak on bigger stages, whatever whatever it is, whatever your personal ambitions are, that you're never going to get to the end. Once you start on this journey, you will become obsessed with self-improvement. You're never going to get to the end. So you've got to love self-improvement for what it is.
No, that's huge. That's huge. And I feel like there's a ton of truth and value in that. And I'm wondering too, you know, I hear you a lot talking about adding value. And one thing that I see a lot of younger entrepreneurs kind of struggle with is when they add value, how they're going to charge for that additional value, and how a lot of times I see sometimes they have trouble maintaining margins because they like feel like they might not want to charge more, or like how did you go about that when you were adding value? Did you clearly increase the service price, or what was that looking like for you guys?
Sure thing. So, I mean, what you really want to do is develop what in a lot of entrepreneurs called a productocracy, where essentially you are no longer having to do any marketing. You are providing such value that you are essentially the core person that everybody wants to work with. I think one piece of advice that I would give is you want to position yourself in a market. And I think the idea of positioning over outbound marketing is incredibly important. You want people in your space. Let's just say, I don't know, you do Google AdWords, now called Google Ads. You want to be known as the Google Ads guy. Whoever, anyone asks, if you say, look, I need some help doing this, and you say that to someone, you need to be the person that they recommend. And that, I think, is critically important because you will get to the stage where essentially people will set their own prices for you. People will start to outbid each other. While that's long term, that's pretty good. I mean, the thing is, I'm going to give slightly different advice from what I gave a moment ago about pricing yourself low at the start to get that experience. But once you've got that experience, you want to scale, and now you want to monetize. Then at the end of the day, you've got to think about it as like this. If you double your prices and you lose half your clients, you are making exactly the same amount, your overheads are likely lower, and you've freed up half of your day. And at the end of the day, that is the mindset you've got to have. 80% of your revenue will come from 20% of your customers. And I promise you, I've worked in a lot of industries, and that rule basically applies everywhere. Yeah. I am a big fan, and people still, laugh at me for this. I do essentially fire customers. I say, look, actually, you're not paying enough money. We can't afford to support you. If you're, go away, work with somebody else. If in 12 months' time you're on a larger scale, then come back, give us a call, and we can help you. But right now, we're not the best service provider, to do what you need. And I think that's the big thing. Just to understand your market, get a feel for it. Especially if you're in marketing fields or in sales or anything like that, try and quantify how much value you're actually providing to your customer. If you're doing something really tangible, like, marketing, like paid ads, let's say pay-per-click ads, you know exactly how much you are returning to that customer. So at the end of the day, whatever you charge them, it's still going to provide value to them. That's the core thing. If you're doing something less tangible, then it can be a little bit different. But once again, try and see if you can find a way to understand the value you're providing. When let's just say you're doing web design, when you're getting testimonials from previous clients, don't just get them to talk about the design of the website or the service they received, or, the more holistic, intangible things. But try and understand, actually, have you hugely increased the amount of traffic to their website? Have you hugely increased their conversion rate? Try and use numbers, because if you quantify your value in numbers, then it's very easy to price yourself. And I think that would be the core piece of advice I've got on that.
No, that's huge. So I'm wondering, how did you guys do that with cybersecurity and whatnot? Like, what numbers would you bring up, and how would you quantify, the prices that you're just like?
Sure thing. Yeah. I mean, cybersecurity, and I think security as a whole as a field is a very different one, because essentially it almost works on a fear metric that however much you pay us, the outcome, if something goes wrong, is always going to cost you far, far more.
Yeah, definitely.
And I mean, some people, I think, from outside of the industry almost think it's some form of extortion, but actually, I mean, it's just the way that the industry works.
True,
because at the end of the day,
it's true, yeah.
If you're running, a fintech startup and you've got loads of financial data of customers, and your entire database gets dumped on the internet, the cost to you, not only in like lost sales and the fact that your company will essentially close, but also fines from the regulators, is going to be huge. So there is no amount of money that a cybersecurity will charge you that will essentially not be worth it. Yeah. So I mean, that's how that field works. But once again, at the end of the day, you can still use case studies of previous examples. Look and understand the value you're providing. If this is what it's going to cost your client if something goes wrong, and then, you know, calculate, you know, how often is it that an incident like this happens. I'm a big fan of calculating everything. That's how I do most of my you know, economic risk, is understanding, okay, well, this is what it's going to cost me, and here's the percentage that something could or couldn't go wrong. And at the end of the day, when you multiply that out, if it's above 1, then it's a worthwhile investment. If it's below 1, then it's not. And I think actually really starting to understand your figures, and that's not just your financial data, but everything about your industry and your market, is so crucial. And it's painful, it's annoying, and as an entrepreneur, it's not the lifestyle we want. But actually, at the end of the day, if you understand your market to such an extent that you can color code certain industries, then you're doing something right.
Definitely.
Data driven.
Yeah, no, there are some nuggets in there. So what you said too with calculating your risk and above or below 1 of what? Like, what are you looking at for that metric too on that side?
Sure thing. So, I mean, let's just say, okay, I don't know, I'm just going to use almost like insurance as an example, because I think it's just a good example off the top of my head. So if you're going to pay $100 for insurance, let's say for a year, and the chance of you having to claim on that insurance in that year is 10%, then that essentially puts your total cost at $1,000. You know, that's how it works. So if that claim would be valued at above $1,000, then it's worthwhile getting that insurance, because statistically speaking, at the cost of the insurance and at the chance of claiming, you will save every time. At the end of the day, if you're only going to claim $950 on your insurance, in the short term, you know, it might still make sense to have that insurance. But if you've got that cash flow, if you've got that cash buffer, then it's not worthwhile. And I think, you know, I calculate using that essentially simple formula with everything. At the end of the day, what's the investment in? What's the percentage of an outcome? And what would be the cost of an outcome? And you can calculate that. And I mean, I think, you know, if you're a small business and you're struggling with cash flow, that can be pretty difficult, because, you know, you might say, okay, it's better to buy $100 insurance if that's going to save me $950 statistically over the course of the year. But if you've got that cash flow and you can afford that $950 payment, then, you know, that's the approach that you want to take. But I think that understanding the data of your company, you know, I mean, even still, I have a very laid back executive role in all of my companies right now, but I am still slaving away over data, looking at everything, analyzing it, because as great as holistic analysis is and understanding your market, going out and doing market research, at the end of the day, numbers don't lie. And if you follow the numbers, you will succeed.
Yeah, and that's great. And it reminds me of this kind of like internal debate that I've had recently, and I want your opinion on this. So I was thinking about entrepreneurship and different people in general and what they're best at. And I was thinking a lot of people, sometimes they'll fail because they'll try to be like Sam Ovens, who's, you know, very engineer minded, or they might try to be like Russell Brunson, who's very creative minded. When, you know, if somebody has an engineer mind, I feel like they should double down on that and hire creatives. And I'm just wondering, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but would you say you have more of like an engineer, like mathematical mind when it comes to entrepreneurship, or would you say you're more creative in that sense?
Sure thing. Yeah, I mean, I would say certainly that I have got that engineer mindset. Yeah. I mean, I'm hopelessly uncreative, and anyone that's ever worked with me will be very much aware of that. That idea generation and brainstorming is certainly not the way that I operate. But I mean, what I often say to people, and I think this is something that I'm realizing over like the sort of the last 6 months, is actually the creative process is surprisingly logical. I mean, you know, if you're trying to generate ideas, at the end of the day, all you've got to do is map out your market. Let's just say if you're trying to, you know, fill a gap in a market, map out that market and look at where the gaps are, and the ideas will essentially naturally fly in your head. I don't think there's any such thing as, you know, ideas just coming in, or, you know, having a great burst of inspiration. At the end of the day, everything's influenced by the information you have. So I still think, you know, it is very much that kind of process. And I think, you know, being an entrepreneur naturally is sort of being a jack of all trades. And that can be difficult sometimes. And that's why you'll find often, like, you know, if you look at Silicon Valley startups, the founders, once these companies grow, are very, very rarely the CEOs, because being a top level executive is being very, very different from being an entrepreneur. Yeah. To be an entrepreneur, you need a certain skill of management and being able to be an executive. But as an executive, that's exactly what they know. You know, going and doing an MBA is not going to make you an entrepreneur, but it is going to make you a top level executive. And I think you've got to understand your strengths and your weaknesses, and equally you've got to value your time. I mean, it's a bit of a tangent off from what I'm saying, but very, very similar in the sense of, entrepreneurs early on are very unwilling to pay people to do things. But let's just say, okay, you can get virtual assistants to do most automated work, $3-4 an hour. So, if you're doing those tasks every single day, you are valuing your time at $3 or $4 or less. And that's the way you've got to see it. Once again, for me, it's all about the numbers. Actually, me sitting and making sales calls. Let's just say I pay my sales team $35 an hour. Do I value my time above $35 an hour? Yeah, for sure I do. So I'm going to replace myself with a sales executive. And I think, that is that mindset. But if you've got a specific affinity, do try and double down on it. Just because, something's trending that doesn't necessarily fit your affinity. If everybody else is doing something else, that's absolutely great. Look, you want to be able to dabble in everything to understand what's going on, but at the end of the day, understand what you're good at and try and build a business model around that.
Definitely. And one thing I found was very interesting that you hit on that I haven't really heard many people talk about, to be honest, is mapping out the industry, looking for the gaps in the industry. Because you always hear about, find what other people aren't doing, but it sounds like you have a strategic process to do that. So I'm curious to hear, when you're approaching an industry, what are you doing to figure out where the gaps are and how do you fill those?
Sure thing. So, actually, this is something that I learned probably a couple of years back. Actually, I was taught it by somebody at a startup incubator here in the UK for a startup that I was planning on launching and actually decided against to because I did my market validation, realized there wasn't a market there. And actually, the thing he said to me is, you've got this market data, you're talking about the market cap, you're talking about the number of people that want this service, you're quoting all these studies. But at the end of the day, have you actually gone out on the street and spoken to anyone? And I hadn't. And actually, that's what I did. And I started to understand that despite all of this evidence that my idea was great, it just wasn't something that people saw the value in. And sometimes actually that's the biggest thing. Your startup idea might be the best thing ever, but if you can't convince anyone that it's the best thing ever, nobody's going to buy your stuff. And at the end of the day, get out on the street and speak to people. And there's so many ways you can do that. I say quite often, even if you're doing something really, really small and something really, really lean, like starting a dropshipping store, just go and understand the market. I say that Reddit and Facebook groups are both great for that. Just throw some ideas, throw some questions out and get some feedback. And the first thing you should do, whatever your business is build a focus group, even if it's only 10, 15 people. Most people will actually do it for free and for fun, assuming you don't expect too much of them. Otherwise, throw some money at them, throw a free subscription at them. It doesn't matter. Just get a group of people that you can sit down and say, look, we've come up with this. And it will cost you so much less than if you push a product to market that essentially has no value whatsoever. And I think one thing, there was a story of a guy called Trey Llewellyn. He's a ClickFunnels 2 Comma Club member. He's actually coming on my podcast in a few weeks' time.
Oh, that's awesome.
The story that he shared on his 30 days was he ran these competition brokerages. He'd get brands to all pitch in a product and all push this competition to their email list. And essentially they would share the email and contact list of everyone that entered with all of the brands. But of course, he then ended up with an email list of 100,000 people. Now, a lot of people would then think, okay, I'm going to set up a store, and monetize that through e-commerce, push it out to the list. But actually for him, it was much slower. He spent 3 months going out, asking people to send him pictures of t-shirts that they really, really liked, saw the common themes, had 3 designs made, and did that market research. So even though he was at a far later stage, in fact, he'd got an entire captive audience essentially waiting to buy his stuff, he still didn't rush it. And I think that is the mindset you've got to have about market validation. There is a huge number of studies, a huge number of research companies that are going to tell you loads of insights about gaps in the market. You can look at Google Trends, you can look at keyword volume. It doesn't matter. Go out and speak to people. Find an area, find a customer persona that you want to solve a problem of. Phone them up and say, what are 3 of your biggest problems right now? I've got nothing to sell you, but I just want to know, and who knows, I might be able to help you out.
That's a huge nugget, I feel like, especially as an entrepreneur starting out. I feel like if I did that when I started my marketing agency, I would have gotten a lot further than, just thinking I kind of already know because I saw a YouTube video where these people said I should do this, so I'm just offering it as a service, when in reality I could have definitely added more value if I just listened and asked those questions.
Yeah, why guess about your market when there's 7 billion potential customers outside your door?
Yeah, man, that's great. So I'm wondering too, and I feel like a lot of people are probably thinking about this as well, you're managing a lot of people at this point. I mean, do you want to start by saying, I guess, how many people that you were managing?
Sure thing. So, I mean, right now, in terms of our permanent employees plus our subcontractors and independent workers, we're at a network of over 300 right now that I'm responsible for. And that has many, many arms to it. There's so many different roles. I've managed executives, I've managed tech guys, I've managed creative guys, I manage mergers and acquisitions advisors. We've done a lot of things. And I mean, I think actually, I'm sure you'll ask me some questions about this, but at the end of the day, managing 150 people, managing 300 people is no different from managing a team of 5. You've just got to find ways to essentially condense the amount of time you need to put in.
Yeah. No, that's such a cool point to make, and it's so true. I mean, when you scale that large, you have to find a way to keep the time consistent. Otherwise, you just simply can't scale. So let's dive into that then. How did you kind of, when you started scaling up, what did that look like for your role? And then how did your role evolve in that, managing of that many people?
Sure thing. So, I mean, when you're managing a small team, there's still room to micromanage. And obviously that is one thing that you have to cut out, but essentially you've got to put systems in place, have systems of accountability. That's something that I've always had very much in my environment. I treat every single member of staff as if they're a sales professional, and I operate on that same thing. Everybody has targets regardless of what they're doing, and I think that's pretty important. That's very traditional, in the sales industry, the number of outreaches made, the amount of sales closed, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, it's the same thing for everything. I like to reward people that work for me based on the value they provide rather than the hours they work. In my opinion, if you're a graphic designer and I give you 5 pieces of work, why, if you complete those 5 pieces of work in that half the time, am I going to pay you half as much money? It just doesn't make sense. At the end of the day, they need to be rewarded for that. And that's why I have that core structure. I think having good leadership is incredibly important. And I think the way that the role changes is it moves very much from management to leadership. You have middle managers to manage employees. You're now more about leadership and inspiring a culture that essentially flows throughout your company. And I mean, company culture is not about what quotes you have on the wall or, what beanbags you have in your lunchroom. Company culture is about what it feels like. And actually, I mean, one book actually that I think, really quantified that in my mind was Grant Cardone's Be Obsessed or Be Average. That was a good book. There's a chapter on that about obsessive leadership and actually talking about how if you at the top are so results driven and you inspire that down, then people will essentially embrace that mindset. Even if actually they're earning less than they would somewhere else, because it's almost like cult indoctrination. And I mean, I think that's probably a bad way of putting it. I think probably Harvard Business Review isn't going to come and interview me about how I indoctrinate my team, but at the end of the day, it is that same mindset. I have members of staff who will go home and in the evening research things, or improve themselves so they can offer a better service to my clients, or members of staff that will be willing to take phone calls and respond to emails overnight regardless, just because they care that much about their work. And that's not because there's a pressure to do so, but it's because they care. And I think the core thing that I embody as a leader and as a manager is about giving ownership of tasks to workers. I give members of staff complete control over their own functional areas, but at the end of the day, then I accept no excuses. So, let's just say if I give a member of staff a complete overall responsibility for a project, even if, let's just say, a subcontractor doesn't deliver work on time, I'm still going to hold them accountable. And that's sort of the trade-off. They get complete ownership and they get all the praise when something goes right. And, they have ownership over their task. But if something goes wrong, then that's their fault either way. And, there are some people that don't like that working environment. I completely get that. That's not a problem. But I've selected those people that thrive in that environment and are willing to understand and take, the real problems when other things go wrong. They thrive under that level of pressure. And I think certainly for me, when I recruit, I have a mini army of entrepreneurs, if you like. And actually many of my teams, many of my staff go on to start their own businesses and actually do very, very well. And I mean, if you look at that in a traditional sense, if you've done a Harvard MBA, they'll tell you that high employee turnover is a terrible thing. There's something wrong with your company culture or something wrong with your management. You're not paying them enough, whatever it is. I don't look at it like that, because actually, are our recruitment costs very, very high? Yes, we have a huge employee turnover. But at the end of the day, when those employees are there, are they providing insane amounts of value that no other company can rival? Yes, they are. And that model, we found a sweet spot for it that, allows us to operate at the highest level and essentially have a team of industry leaders, but still operate, with good price margins.
Yeah, no, that's really, there are a whole bunch of things in there that I felt were really valuable and really, unusual from the typical business model, which I'm sure is a big part of why you guys were able to hit those levels of success that you hit. So, I'm just going to start with one of them. There's a few I want to hit on, but I know you said that you give people a lot of responsibility and you let them reap the reward, and vice versa. If something goes wrong, they're clearly going to take that hit. So what's that looking like? Because clearly if you say this didn't go well, what the hell, they're not going to feel good, but there's not really a repercussion. And at the same time, if they have a base payment, let's say, and they do very well, is there a bonus too? So I'm wondering repercussions and rewards, kind of how that's weighted in your structure.
Sure thing. So, to an extent, a lot of it is monetary. We do have bonus systems, commission-based systems for salespeople, the classic stuff. But I think it is so deeply ingrained in the culture of the way that we work that people gain a sense of gratification from it, just from achieving. And I think that's what I really want to try and nurture, is that actually, okay, all the odds are against you because you're taking responsibility for everybody else's problems too. But when you achieve, then essentially you have that level. And you'll actually notice this if you look at a lot of the big innovative companies. It's exactly the same thing. Google has a program, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, which basically allows teams of Google software engineers, if they've got a side project that they want to run, they can put together a team and have it funded by Google and put together their own little project. Google recently released a kind of Pinterest competitor. Once again, I can't remember off the top of my head what it's called, but essentially that came from that program. And I think it's the same. It's exactly the same concept. Yes, we have monetary rewards, but I think we have, this level of culture that people who succeed are generally celebrated within the company at whatever level it is. And people want to see each other succeed. And when they succeed, everybody celebrates in that. And I think it works in a pretty similar way to how most sales teams do. Do we have leaderboards in the sense traditionally of the classic boiler room where, people are pressured to do better and people are pitched against each other? The bottom 5 people on this board at the end of the month aren't going to have jobs. No, of course not. But actually, if you can twist that and turn that into something positive so people want to achieve and there's that friendly level of, competition, then that's how you can really get the best out of your team.
Definitely. So is this all being done in a physical location too? Or because I know you got tons of different people, I'm sure some of them are physical, some of them are VAs. So I'm wondering how you do this kind of entanglement of culture between the two. And, if I guess how many people are done in the physical location too, they're present.
So, sure thing. In a physical location, it is easier because you can essentially surround people in culture. And look, I'm not going to entirely diss the idea of having quotes up on the wall because I think there's value in that. But if you're just putting quotes up on the wall or, putting plants everywhere in your office, that in itself doesn't create culture, but you can use that to nurture that culture. If you surround people in an environment where from day one that, you're essentially reinforcing the things that you expect from them, and that's great. With virtual roles, it is harder. I think one of the core things is the talent that you bring in the first place needs to be receptive. If somebody comes in and is essentially completely adverse to the way that we do business or completely adverse to our culture, if they're in a physical location, eventually you might be able to get them to change their mind. In a virtual location, there's absolutely no chance. If you have people, though, that actually thrive in that environment, then that is far, far easier because they want to be part of it. And, there's no need to constantly be sending out employee quizzes or satisfaction surveys because at the end of the day, that's what they want and they will create that environment for them. I shouldn't have to explain to someone, you have complete ownership of your task, but, you're going to have the benefit or the disadvantage of it either way. I want employees that understand that from day one and want that. And it makes recruitment hard because most people, just aren't interested in that kind of environment. Because if they wanted to have that level of ownership over their tasks, they'd go out and be freelancers or go out and start their own businesses. But at the end of the day, that's how you need to do it. And virtual staff are still very much included. Physical meetings we always have available for other members of the team to join. We have video conferencing in all of our conference rooms. And, virtual staff will always be assigned to a physical team. We don't segregate virtual or remote staff from those that are working in the office. And I think certainly over the course of COVID, and, for us, like most companies, actually, we're going to have more and more people working remote for the long term anyway. And I think, we've all along merged that. So virtual workers are on the same teams as our in-house teams. It makes absolutely no difference. So when they're having those, those meetings, everybody is included, and there's no level of, remote workers, somewhat, below in on-site workers, or they have their own teams and a support staff. You've really got to ingrain that to the extent that, and I think that is what I love actually, when I go into our offices, we celebrate those that succeed, and people do celebrate each other. It's not a parade set up by, us from corporate. It is something that they want to do. They understand how it feels to succeed, and they celebrate that with each other, which I think is great.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, man. It is. And I know how much effort and meticulous work goes into building a culture. So how did you, because I know you mentioned your recruitment process was tough, and everything you're saying, all I'm thinking is to do that at a mass scale, that has to be hard. So I'm wondering, where do you find these people? How do you reach out to them? What's that process looking like for you?
Sure thing. It gets easier as you go along. Because, once you've got a large team, let's just say I'm recruiting for a new role now. Our company culture is defined. During the recruitment process, we can screen. At the end of the day, we can't screen everyone. Sometimes people will walk in. One thing that, we're doing quite recently, actually, which I came up with a little while ago, is we're actually recruiting multiple people for the role on a probationary period and making it very clear, actually, of the people that are coming in, we are only going to recruit one. A lot of people don't like that, but at the end of the day, it happens. People will come and spend a month with us. They'll get paid. Normally we'll pay above their base rate, essentially, for the risk of it. And they can get a feel for our environment. We do have employee turnover because people will spend 3-4 months and just realize that they don't click in the environment. And that's absolutely fine. I think our job ads are written in such a way that it's made very clear what we expect. We quite openly say, I can't remember, I've just reviewed a job ad actually that we were sending out today. But at the end of the day, it's, this is who we're looking for. And if this is what you enjoy, or this is what you're looking for, we're not your people. And actually, I was talking to someone the other day about recruitment, and the state of recruitment right now is very difficult for any business. I think that the job market is so competitive that people send out, resumes or applications without really even reading the job description. It's hard for us, as recruiters. But at the end of the day, you try and filter that down. Sometimes it is worth almost trying to scare people off because you only want people that are the strongest believers in your ideology. The other thing I would say about recruitment is actually I recruit a lot of people with a lack of experience because I think you can really mold them into what you want. If you've had, let's just say I'm looking for an executive. One of my executives at Padfield International actually started as one of my personal assistants. That's how he progressed through our career ladder. I think there's value in, people who've got MBAs. And look, we've recruited executives that have had MBAs and they provide an insight, but I don't think you can fill an executive board with Harvard and Wharton MBAs. We bring people in from the ground and we mold them. We want people that want to achieve and want to go down that path, but we train them in-house and teach them how we like to do things. Because at the end of the day, our style of business is very different from what they teach in traditional education. So being able to mold people is quite good. And, I see that actually, and this is sort of advice, even if you're wanting to go for a traditional job, but you're a teenager, trying to get into a career path, most companies now actually will try and get you into their ecosystem as soon as possible because then they can mold you how they want. I know certainly in the UK, like a lot of CPAs and attorneys, rather than asking you to go through law school or, get your degree and then come out and go on a graduate scheme, they're actually trying to pick you up far, far before. And in the UK, what are called degree apprenticeships, where essentially you're on a permanent internship while you're at college. And, I think that is certainly a big measure in recruitment that more and more companies are pushing towards. Just try and get that company culture and get it into people early on before they're told things by, university lecturers. At the end of the day, the worst thing is when you have somebody new come in and they question the way that we're doing things because in college they were told that things would be different. That is what you've got to try and avoid as a recruiter, basically.
Yeah, dang, there's tons of value in there. And I mean, I feel like that's such a large part of your guys' success with recruiting your recruiters and whatnot. You know, when you first started doing that, kind of a bit of a paradox there. But so with that, I mean, how did you start that process? Because I feel like that first domino has to be super important for you as somebody who's going to trust to bring on the right people and whatnot.
Sure thing. I mean, it's difficult. To this day, actually, my executive team, and to an extent even me, still has a lot of executive oversight over the roles that we recruit for and how we recruit. And I think you shouldn't just be recruiting for roles based on function, but instead about actually the culture that they can bring to a team. Team-based recruitment is incredibly important. Not, in your recruitment sort of metrics that you're testing people against, your matrix, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Don't just talk about the roles and the function of the role, the experience they've got, what value they can provide, but actually about how can they modify the dynamic of the company and how can they essentially give us different insights into things that we haven't seen before. That's why actually we quite like to, you see it a lot in sales, but if you look like at the top level executives, I'm pretty sure off the top of my head that one of the new executives, or even the CEO of Amtrak Railways, was actually an executive for, I'm pretty sure it was Delta Airways. He was a professional executive, but he pivoted from one industry to another, and I think that's very much the mindset you've got to have, because business is done very differently in different industries. So if you can bring someone in who's got experience in a different industry, they can apply those rules of business to your industry, and you can you completely change things how they are. And I think certainly with the Invictus Group and my private investments over the last sort of 6 months has really shown that. I'm operating in a lot of industries that are very traditional, don't have much future prospects. The business models are traditional, and then I come in with an entrepreneurial mindset and do things very differently, and that's how we've grown that success. I mean, in terms of recruiting recruiters at the start, I think it is better off to outsource that. Having full-time recruiters, A, isn't realistic for most small businesses, and B, is very hard to do. But start to, work with recruiting consultants. And actually, not only will they help you with finding the right candidates, but actually help you understand what it is that you want. Because it's very easy to say, I've got this company culture in my mind. How can I recruit that? That's very difficult. But if you work with someone that's an expert, they can actually break that down into intangible terms. What does that actually mean? And then, actually bringing on recruiters is pretty natural. Actually, some of our HR guys, some of our recruiters have worked in functional roles within the company and had such a passion for what it is that we do, and such a passion for our company culture, they've actually transitioned into recruiting. But if not, once again, I don't think the process is any different. You've just got to get people that think in the right way. Don't get people that are against what you do and then try and change their mind or try and twist them into working how you want to work. You want people that on their first day, you don't even need to talk to them. They come in and they have that right mindset. Okay, you've sat down at your desk, you're a salesperson, your phone doesn't work, doesn't matter. Get your cell phone out and make sales. You want people that are proactive, interested and engaged in the work they're doing, not people that are essentially looking to just follow a handbook and operate like a virtual assistant in the Philippines for $3 an hour.
I get exactly what you're saying. So I want to transition to precision mailing, because I feel like it's a big part of what you're doing right now. And I mean, it's very interesting for me because clearly, first off, do you want to explain kind of like, I guess, your move to that and what that company is for the listeners out there that don't know?
Sure thing. So Precision Mailing was a company I bought back at the start of March as part of the Invictus Group. So the Invictus Group as a whole, we're a private investment company. We're looking at small businesses, usually buying them off of people that are about to retire, can't find anyone to take over the businesses, and essentially they just let them wither away. They're industries that are unpopular, unsexy, and uninteresting. And essentially we take those and we grow them with an entrepreneurial mindset. So that was the Invictus Group. In a few years' time, we're planning on launching that as a fund that other people can invest in. That's going to be interesting. But one of the companies that we took over back at the start of March, the 2nd of March, was Precision Mailing. It's based in South Florida. It's a mail and print house. It's been running for over 35 years. It's gone through a number of different owners. But at the end of the day, it's a relatively boring company. Clients will send in orders. We print, let's say, flyers or mailers. We address them. We do the mailing list. We send them out and we drop them over at the post office. It's about 200 foot away. Yeah. And, it's very boring. And what we've gone in and changed that hugely. I've started to understand where the gaps were. I've phoned up clients and understood actually what are their biggest problems. Yeah. And essentially I've turned that now into a 360 marketing company. So we're now providing all types of marketing marketing in a single campaign, because if you've got a separate company doing your digital marketing, and then you've got print marketing, and then you're doing TV, it's hard to have a cohesive brand image, and it's very hard to have a cohesive campaign. If you can utilize those together, that's far better. And it's one of those industries where we've made big changes and it's scared a lot of people. In fact, there's a number of businesses that essentially, if people have gone into early retirement because they're like, I can't be bothered to compete with this. And that's exactly how our business model works. We scale and we grow, and then we essentially grow through acquisitions. So that's been the fun of precision mailing. But we've gone from $700,000 in revenue when I took over the business, only a few months ago, and now if we prorate it based on what we're doing right now in the middle of coronavirus, we're already at above $2.5 million annually. So the scale on that has been absolutely huge, and I think once again it's a big mindset thing. Coronavirus, people are using that as an excuse to do less work, to slow things down, but at the end of the day, that's what everyone else is doing. So I'm going out and I'm doubling down. At the middle of March, when coronavirus was getting to its worst and people were worrying, everybody else was stopping their marketing efforts, slowing back, trying to spend less money. I went out and bought a new $45,000 printer because that's the mindset. And I think because I've taken that entrepreneurial mindset and pushed that into such a traditional industry, that's how we're really innovating. And once again with precision mailing, I walked in and actually I fired a fair few clients. There's a few clients that would do small mailers, and I've said, look, I just can't support these. We're growing now at a scale that we can't support your business. But actually, I've got a guy down the road that will do this, and that's a great recommendation. But we've taken the assets and the core brand reputation of the business and pivoted it. So rather than doing 200, 500 pieces mailings, we're now doing 25,000, 30,000 pieces for one client every single month, servicing national companies, international companies, pivoting into 360 marketing. And we've essentially taken that on a huge level.
So that's super inspiring too, to hear about how you're able to change that. I mean, it's always great to hear people who focus and see those results. So I'm curious to hear, what you're comfortable with sharing. What are the gaps that you filled in that traditional industry? Because that sounds very boring, and I feel like there's tons of room for innovation. So what did you end up doing?
My business broker actually originally, I worked with a mergers and acquisitions advisor. When I was searching for the next thing to add to the portfolio, he showed me the listing off of the MLS. I said, I'm not running a direct mailing company. And then, actually said, have a look at it again. And I looked and I was like, what, the figures here are pretty good. And, I did my due diligence and I'm thinking, I can actually add value here. Because it's one of those industries that's very traditional. A client basically has to come and say exactly what they want. I want this many mailers, this size, to these addresses, this is what I want. You'll get a quote back, you'll pay the invoice, and it will go out. And I realized there were people that are actually looking for a more specific touch, a more bespoke service. And that was sort of the first thing that we did, is start to actually apply some of those modern customer service principles to that traditional business. Equally, it's just about learning. So many people in these industries have been doing what they're doing for 30, 40 years. Certainly the postal service has changed hugely over 30 or 40 years. And what it means is that, most of these companies just aren't doing things. I'll give you an example. The United States Postal Service has a business mailing directory, which basically, if you go on their website and you're looking for someone to do your mailing, you can type in your zip code and get access to local mailing companies near you. Now, nobody really knew it existed. Only the big national franchises ever listed their stores there. Because I was new and I was looking through all the documentation, going through all the websites, I spotted it and I registered myself. And, that's doing us $50,000 in revenue every single month. And that's the mindset that you've got to have. And there are so many industries like that. And I'm picking up so many small businesses right now. I've got literally a pile of 20 just sitting on my desk behind the camera of businesses that I'm going through, and it's all sorts of industries. Crime scene cleanup. It's an industry that nobody wants to be involved in, but the money's great. Or I'm just trying to think of some off the top of my head, but it's about how can you go in and inject entrepreneurial experience into a very traditional business. The industry, printing and mailing, has always been an industry where there's enough room for everybody has a slice of the pie, it's nice and easy, everybody makes a fair living, and everyone just moves on. Nobody was really innovating, and actually at the end of the day that was causing direct detriment to the customers. None of these companies were providing value to the customers. I go in and I say, look, you know what? Anyone that phones me up can have a free 45-minute consultation. I'll talk to you about marketing. No big deal. And that alone has had, a huge impact. And that's the mindset that you've got to have. And it's just like the little things you'll find in these industries. Search engine optimization is terrible. I mean, it's just a little thing. But I spent literally, I did it myself because I couldn't even be bothered to hire someone to do it. I spent like 48 hours redesigning the website, organizing some backlinks, and now I rank #1 for everything in the area. You know, you've just got to go in and apply, you know, let's just say you want to run a digital marketing agency. Learning about SEO to do that probably isn't going to be the easiest thing. It's not going to be a quick fix because it's something that everybody's talking about. But actually, some of the easy things that you're taught in YouTube videos about how grow your company, they might not apply to the trendiest, latest things, but they certainly do apply to those traditional industries. And actually, if you really want to get down and love the process of entrepreneurship and you love the result, then actually go in and find something that's just not as desirable, because the market is always going to be there. And you know what? Maybe for you, you do want to run that unicorn billion-dollar startup. That's fine. But you know, if you've got no money and you're going out and pitching people for seed capital, which I've been there and done it, is hard and, to be honest, completely impossible. But if you've run an unattractive business for 3 years, make yourself $3 million, and that gives you a huge starting point. What you'll always notice is the wealthiest people are actually not the people that are always in your face, the people that aren't always as obvious. I mean, you know, you do get some really wealthy people that will coach and mentor and go on podcasts, but at the end of the day, they're not sharing their secrets, because their secrets are hidden in plain sight. There's no formula for success. There's no formula for being a millionaire. It's just about finding something that works, finding somewhere that you can add value, and scaling it over and over and over again until you're in a position that you're happy with.
Definitely. So, I mean, we're clearly wrapping up the podcast here. I just got a few more questions I'd like to ask all my guests. And one last question on the topic that we were on. I mean, just with, did you say too, you were adding like customizations to because I know you said you were doing 45-minute free consultation calls to add value, but I'm curious if there's anything else that you want to share in that industry. I just think it's so fascinating to see such a boring industry and then a person like you shaking it up.
Sure thing. So, I mean, look, entrepreneurs, you know, spend ages and ages and ages doing market validation and understanding their market. But at the end of the day, they're not listening to what their customers want. You know, I was looking at, I went through a 3-week training period with the existing owner, and there were jobs that were coming in asking for email marketing. And he went, well, we don't do email marketing, so we'll say no to them. And I'm like, you've literally got a customer that is willing to throw money at you for a service that you don't even offer, and you're turning them down. How hard would it actually be to phone up an email list brokerage, you know, get an email list from them, double the price, and send it out to the customer? It's not, you know, a big deal. And that is the mindset that I think you've got to have. Don't focus so much on market research in terms of running surveys or, you know, trying to get information. Look at what your customers are asking for. Look at their pain points. Find problems and solve problems. Have that consumer-centric approach, you know, that market-centric approach, rather than a product-centric approach. Don't push products that don't solve problems.
Perfect. Love it. So one of the questions I like to ask all my guests too are, you know, what is advice that you hear really often but you think is bad? Because there's so many different things floating around the internet. I'm curious what you hear a lot but personally disagree with.
Work hard. That is the worst piece of advice I've ever heard. Work smart instead. Look, you need to work hard, but don't define that as your metric. Much in the same way that I was saying earlier, you know, I don't really reward my employees on the amount of hours they work. I reward them on the value they provide. Treat yourself in that exact same way, because I think this work hard idea leads to something called action faking. And essentially what that is when you're doing lots of things that feel like you're an entrepreneur, but you're not actually really progressing anywhere. So let's just say you know, I've been talking about dropshipping a lot. Let's just say you've launched that dropshipping store. You've got your store set up. You've got your products. And at the end of the day, you're ready to go. But instead of, you know, going out and getting customers, you've recently read an article that says if you change the add to cart button on your website to green, your conversion rate is going to increase by 10%. At the end of the day, if you haven't got anybody coming on your website and nobody's ever bought anything, it doesn't matter whether your conversion rate's 10% or 90%. You're not going to sell anything. So that's why I don't like that work hard metric. I very much like that work smart. You know, start small. And I'll just give you one short example, and then you know, I'll finish this answer. But you know, with Precision Mailing, actually, I pushed out a new website, and, you know, I'd done a front page, a contact page, and I'd done all the pages in the middle. great SEO, everything was perfect. You know, it was exactly how I wanted it to be. When I published it, I've got no idea how I did it. We can blame WordPress for this, but none of the central pages on my website actually published. I only published a front page and a contact page. Now, had I have known this, I would have been distraught. It would have been a disaster. I'd have been panicking. I'd have been fixing anything. I didn't notice for 2 weeks. In those 2 weeks, my conversion rate on my website had tripled. I'd made loads of money through leads I'd gathered on my website. You know, I fall I fall victim to the own things that I complain about nowadays. But it's that exact same thing. I was so focused about getting everything right before I launched it. But you know what? I could have launched that half-finished website a week before and gained a week of those extra leads. So work smart, not hard.
That is huge. And even like when I started my first drop shipping store, right? Because that's how I got into entrepreneurship, shiny object. I want all this money. I spent so long trying to like write my own descriptions and nitpick, and I didn't sell anything for months. So I think that's I started learning once I dove in, not when I was preparing. And then the last question I always ask is, you know, clearly as an entrepreneur and individual, you've had, like you said, you can call it fair. I think most people call it a very tremendous amount of success for a person of your level and age thus far in your life. But clearly there are always things that we can improve on as individuals, entrepreneurs, either in our life or business. So I'm wondering for you, what's the one thing or, you know, just something large that you're really looking to mold and change in your life or business to be better in that area right now?
Sure thing. I mean, I think for me, the big transition is, you know, I've worked in an unattractive industry. Now, actually, I want to be able to spread my message and teach other people. And I think that's the huge thing. Once again, the thing actually that has defined my career all the way is about adding value, monetize later. And actually, I've realized that now, where can I add value the most? Well, before, you know, it was providing value to my customers. Now I've realized with the experience that I've got, the best way that I can add value is by, you know, teaching other people, speaking to other people, and sharing my own insights. So essentially, everybody can grow together. Because at the end of the day, you know, we're all entrepreneurs. We're all in it for the same reason. There's no reason why we shouldn't sit down and share advice with each other. And, you know, that's why I'm really trying to, you know, share my insights and support people, mentor people, coach people to be able to grow their own businesses.
That's beautiful. Love it. Love it. So where's the best place for a listener to follow up with you at after dropping all this value?
Sure thing. I mean, my Instagram is usually my best place. I respond to DMs pretty quickly. I'm at Elliot.Padfield. You know, I do everything over there. I try and share as many insights as I can. I'll respond to your questions. And I do also offer paid coaching. I've got quite a few students that are having tremendous success over there. The rest of the links to all my stuff is available for my Instagram as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Elliot. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's been great to be with you, Gavin.